During the 1960s industrial boom, manufacturing complexes rapidly expanded into massive, multi-acre sprawling footprints. Factories were churning out consumer goods at a scale the world had rarely seen. To run these enormous facilities, engineers relied on a relatively simple mechanism, the electromechanical relay. When you energize a magnetic coil inside the relay, it physically pulls a switch closed. That closed switch allows power to flow, turning a machine motor on. Cut the power to the coil, the switch springs back, and the motor shuts off. Controlling a single motor this way is straightforward, but an entire factory assembly line requires orchestrating hundreds or even thousands of precise, perfectly timed movements. To handle all those complex sequences, factories amassed entire electrical rooms filled with enormous metal cabinets. These structures housed row after towering row of hardwired relays, all meticulously linked together to control specific machine actions. But assembly lines inevitably require engineering updates. When a 1970s controls designer needed to modify a machine's operation, they couldn't simply type in a new line of code. They had to physically unlace bundled wires, pull them out of their neat ducts, and add new connections in a crisscross point-to-point pattern to save time. After months of constant modifications, these cabinets devolved into a chaotic tangle of wires that floor workers referred to as a rat's nest. If a single internal relay coil failed, troubleshooting the system meant tracing a dead signal through hours of agonizing manual labor. Industrial automation had hit a physical ceiling. Factories simply couldn't scale their operations because human hands could no longer wire, trace, and maintain these electromechanical systems fast enough to keep the lines running. The breaking point arrived on New Year's Day, 1968. Engineers at General Motors' Hydromatic division issued a desperate request to outside contractors for a completely new kind of device they called a standard machine controller. GM laid out a strict set of technical requirements. First, it needed to be a solid-state system, meaning no moving mechanical parts. Second, it had to survive an industrial environment filled with dirt, moisture, and heavy vibration. And third, it had to be modular, so broken components could be easily swapped out. The fourth mandate was the trickiest. It required the device to be easily programmed and maintained using an existing visual framework known as ladder logic. Factory electricians were accustomed to physical wiring diagrams. They weren't going to learn abstract computer code. They needed a visual interface that directly mimicked the physical layout they were already familiar with. In a digital ladder logic program, the visual structure mirrors a physical circuit. The left line acts as the hot wire, carrying power, and the right as the neutral. Programmers place digital switches, relays, and coils across horizontal rungs to complete a logical power path. By demanding a computer that spoke in rungs and rails, GM ensured their new technology wouldn't be sidelined by the workforce keeping the factory alive. Engineer Dick Morley and his company, Bedford Associates, decided to tackle GM's difficult list of requirements. Their initial prototypes were plagued by severe limitations. The first machine they built only held 125 words of memory, which was instantly overwhelmed by the code required to replace whole relay cabinets. Worse, the processor was far slower than the 1/60th of a second response time of the old mechanical switches. Meanwhile, early attempts by competing firms were exposing entirely different problems on the factory floor. They built solid-state controllers with open-backed card racks that placed low 24-volt internal wiring right next to high 120-volt power lines. An electrician accidentally shorted 120 volts into the 24-volt system, instantly destroying the entire controller and dooming the technology at that plant. The factory floor proved to be a hostile environment for delicate computer architecture. Without physical ruggedness, even the most advanced logic was one slip of a screwdriver away from total destruction. Despite these setbacks, Morley spun off a new company named Modicon and brought their first official unit to market, dubbed the Modicon 084. Unfortunately, for the first 4 years, sales were abysmal. Part of the problem was Morley himself. He approached the design as an engineering purist, actively resisting requests to add extra features or specialized functions that he felt would needlessly clutter his elegant design. Modicon engineers Michael Greenberg and Lee Rousseau worked around Morley's objections. They designed a new model specifically around the features the industrial market was already requesting. The result of this user-centric redesign was the Modicon 184, and it became a massive success across the industrial sector. With that success, the programmable logic controller finally found its footing. Through its teenage years, it rapidly evolved, integrating advanced mathematical functions, proportional integral derivative logic for process control, and seamlessly pairing with PC software. Today, these rugged metal boxes form the invisible backbone of modern automation. They communicate across vast networks to control absolutely everything, from the timing sequence in a corner vending machine to highly complex robotic assembly arms. The PLC became the industry standard because it was the first computer built to endure the heat and vibration of the shop floor, while speaking a language its operators already understood. It succeeded because it was designed to forgive the mistakes and survive the environment of the human worker.